Good day, folks. Welcome to the Institute for Human-Centered Design, our learning initiative, and this is our global webcast, which was advertised as the Inclusive Housing Design Guide. More specifically, I want you to know that we are acknowledging that this is led by very expert occupational therapists, so it is really using occupational therapist experience for inclusive housing design. And I am delighted to have Jacquel Runnalls, who is the lead author on our favorite book on inclusive design and housing. And she is a housing occupational therapist. And she's joined by her colleague and reviewer of the project, and that is Marney Walker, who is both an OT and a design researcher. So I have had marvelous conversations with these folks, and we've dug into the book very deeply. We are delighted to share it with you. And we have a very detailed presentation today. So we will be presenting, Jacquel will be presenting with Marney for about an hour and 15 or an hour and 20. So this is a long enough presentation. We are not going to take a break, but I advise you to take a bio break as you need to. Remember, all of our webcasts are recorded, and we edit and then put up an accessible version of it on our website within 2 weeks. So you will have another bite at this, and you will be able to watch the captions as the session moves ahead. You will have an opportunity to check in via the chat forum now and throughout the presentation. But I ask you to join us through Q&A if you have questions at the end. We so value the audience participation. It is an invaluable aspect of this whole experience and never fails us. You never fail us. So we're really looking forward to that at the end. So that's chat during the session, Q&A at the end. For those of us that are American architects, this is a 2-credit HEW presentation. The details on getting that credit for you to apply towards your licensure requirements will be clear at the end. If anybody has a problem with that, you can always get in touch with us and we'll lend a hand. Part of what I just want to communicate as we begin this is that these remarkable designers and OTs are working right at the heart of what we believe is critically important to get design right. And that is that they understand the intersection of people and the environment. And they're going to share deeply practical information with you, loads of images, loads of plans. So be prepared. This is going to be quite an extraordinary run for the next hour and a quarter. So without further comment, Jacquel, could you run away with it, please?
Okay, I will. Can everybody see and hear me? Okay. Can you see and hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, that how to follow up on that introduction, really. But thanks so much to Valerie and the Institute for Human-Centered Design for inviting Marney and I to speak today. Oh, sorry, it always jumps that slide. So we're really going to explain
the screen.
Sorry?
You can't see the slides.
Oh, sorry. I will need to come out and sorry about that, folks. Is that better?
No, now it's me on the screen.
Oh, okay. Sorry. After all our practices. Sorry. Oh, here we are. I think. Hopefully. Is that better?
That's it. Great.
Good.
Thank you.
Great. Sorry, no idea what happened after all our practices. Yeah, anyway, thanks so much to Valerie and the Institute for Human-Centered Design. sorry for inviting us today. It always jumps the next slide, no idea why. So really, we're just going to explain a bit about our background as housing occupational therapists, an overview of the guide, really with the aim to, I guess, explain the benefits of housing OT, the added value, and partly also the need to get involved right from the start, why attention to detail is critical and can actually make the difference between something working or not. So I really like this quote. When I was doing a wee bit of research for the guide, I found this. I just thought it really nicely summed up the unique added value that we as occupational therapists bring to. Sorry, it keeps jumping. Just to the design team, and also what's great for this presentation is they're an OT in the US. So I'm not going to go through all of this. You'll be glad to know, but really the aim of this was just to highlight the variety of roles I've had across housing, and which has really directly informed my practice. One of the other key points in relation to this presentation is that I was part of the English Government Technical Housing Standards Review a few years ago, and that led to the building regulations for dwellings, which we're going to touch on a bit. And that was really part of a drive for the previous administration to deregulate. And it was very house builder focused. So it wasn't necessarily what we'd hoped for, but obviously we're acutely aware that we do actually have regulation, whereas many countries don't. And over to Marney.
Hi everyone, lovely to see so many people attending. Just a bit of background about me. When I qualified as an OT, I spent several years based in the community working with individuals in their own homes, making recommendations for equipment and adaptations. But the choice of kit we had to offer was really limited, and although it functioned, it was very clinical and institutional in appearance. And this often affected whether people really would want to use it. So this led to my interest in design, and I pursued further training, including a BA in design and materials practice, and later a master's in design research for disability. So I was then able to combine my design training with all the learning I had from people with lived experience of a really huge variety of abilities and needs, to a specialist role advising on the design of retirement and supported housing. And what I've really learned from that is that it's about working in close collaboration with all the stakeholders involved in the design and build process, which is really key to ensuring that homes are fit for purpose. So it's a constant process of knowledge exchange, explaining the issues and finding technical solutions. I've also developed housing design guidance for neurodiverse residents and those with learning disability, and recently worked with a group of disabled designers and architects on a guidance for the Greater London Authority called Designing with Disabled Experience. And that's what I think we as OTs bring, is that our understanding of learning from people with lived experience, which is what is unique to what we have to offer in these situations. My experience of applying the design for dementia guidance to retirement living schemes, and especially the benefits of visual access, led to my PhD study that I recently completed that explored the expression of everyday aesthetic preferences in dementia through design. Over to Jax.
Thanks. I just realised probably what I forgot to say as well as OT, I also did a master's in accessibility and inclusive design a while ago. But just as I touched on before in that quote, as OTs, our underpinning philosophy is to adopt a holistic, person-centered approach. And the slides and the bullet points here more focus on my current role, which is working with 2 large estate regeneration projects in London. And that includes overseeing the design and delivery of homes and neighbourhoods right from sort of pre-planning through to completion, but also visiting site throughout. So sort of being a point of contact and providing detailed specifications and even sometimes snagging. But critically, I think as we touched on, this is alongside working with people in their own homes. So seeing the barriers created by poor design, as well as undertaking viewings of new build homes and undertaking post-occupancy evaluation with residents. Sadly, something many people designing and building homes don't actually do. The Royal Institute of British Architecture, they have a plan of work which has different stages. And a few years ago, they did embed inclusive design, but more importantly, a couple of years ago, they specifically introduced something called the inclusive design overlay. And that introduced the concept of inclusive design champions and employing inclusive design leads and enablers, which I feel very much aligns with our role and the type of work we're doing. So this, I just really like this sort of concept. It was developed by the Scottish Housing Federation a few years ago, and one of the authors, Jill Pritchard, is a housing occupational therapist. But I guess it just promotes, it goes beyond that inclusive design. So it is about inclusive living, not just the space, but social inclusion and the connections that we make to make something really work. And over to Marney.
So the Inclusive Housing Design Guide is a first edition. Habinteg, who commissioned the book, are an English social housing provider. They had an old guide that was used for their developments, but they recognised the need for a new up-to-date guide in line with the current regulations and good practice. This is based on documents that Jacquel wrote working on her large-scale regeneration schemes in the London Borough of Wandsworth, that has been informed by over 30 years of her experience of advising on new build housing developments. Habinteg are also involved in national campaigns to promote good, inclusive and accessible design and have published a number of access guides over the years. The guide was published by the Royal Institute of British Architects. Jacquel is the author and I acted as a lead peer reviewer throughout the process. The timing for this guide was right. Jacquel had already co-authored Habinteg's third wheelchair housing design guide in 2018, but this only considered physical access and not general needs housing. The English building regulations governing accessible and adaptable housing, known as Part M, which we'll be referring to a lot throughout, had been published in 2015. And by 2023, when we started the guide, we had extensive experience of applying these regulations in Part M. We were very much aware of their limitations, and also that they were often misunderstood and misinterpreted. Being published by RIBA gave it an authority and was a perfect opportunity to influence the design of housing by reaching a wider audience. Habinteg and CAE consulted a wider group of experts in the field who agreed there was an appetite for the guide. They commissioned architects, Acanthus, to provide the technical drawings, and we worked with Carly Dixon, also an architect, on creating drawings of people to scale to demonstrate the usability of the space. We also had invaluable peer review feedback from a range of specialists in accessible and inclusive design throughout the write-up, and that gave us the confidence that it was both accurate and relevant. Next slide, please. These are some of the guides that Habinteg has published over the years, and while specific to the UK, some of you might be aware of the Lifetime Home Standard. Next slide, please. So the guide is essentially responding to these limitations of this building regulation that we've worked to in the UK, but we believe that everything in it, the content, will be very highly relevant to anybody involved in delivering accessible and adaptable housing. Jacquel was part of the Technical Housing Standards Review, which led to the publication of this building regulation Part M, and which introduced 3 categories. Category 1, visitable, Category 2, accessible and adaptable, and Category 3, wheelchair user dwellings. Unfortunately, only this Category 1 is mandatory, and it's a very basic standard, and in practice could hardly be described even as visitable, given the entrance level toilet is very cramped and difficult to use, and there's issues around whether there's stepped access. Category 2 is roughly equivalent to the old Lifetime Home Standard and is intended to provide space and layout for future adaptability For instance, ease of installation of level access showers, wider hallways, entrance level toilets that are more accessible. But the term accessible in this category is very misleading because it doesn't meet wheelchair accessibility standards. And category 3 is the most generous and is intended to provide homes that are accessible for wheelchair users. But as Jacques will explain in detail, it has several limitations. Both category 2 and 3 are optional, and they'll only apply if stipulated by local planning authorities. And unfortunately, this isn't general, although this is done in London, it's not general practice around the UK. It also only considers access for people with mobility parents in getting into and around the home. And it doesn't consider the wider context and access to the community. Over to Jacques.
Hi. So yeah. So following from Marnie, what is the Inclusive Housing Design Guide based on? It was really, as Marnie touched on, based on documents I've written in my Wandsworth role that we're also using as employers' requirements. And the whole aim again was to go beyond this part M that we will keep talking about. In London, we do have to comply with M42 and M43, so sort of general housing and wheelchair housing. But as you can see from the plethora of guidance, which only touches the surface, I was just really keen to include considerations not only to the wider built environment, but also designing for people of all ages and abilities, including people with sensory and cognitive impairments, people who are neurodivergent. The site briefs also include specific products and manufacturers, and I know contractors find that really useful, but obviously we couldn't really include that in the guide. But to sort of, I suppose, to try and get around that, what I did was provide case studies, photos, and ask the architects to show certain products in the technical drawings. And as these, in light of all the key aims, sadly, when designing and building homes, there's still a consistent lack of understanding, not only due to the way Part M is written and its sort of lack of detail, but there does still seem to be a lack of willingness or awareness to provide homes that people can and actually want to live in. There also seems to be this sort of misconception that accessible and adaptable can mean clinical and expensive, when actually it can mean the opposite if incorporated from the start. And I just think there's some real sort of marketing opportunities that aren't always tapped into either. The guide, as I said, built on similar approach to my site briefs, and I'm going to talk about these in much more detail in my practical examples, so I won't go through all these now. I am also aware that there were limitations with the guide, so certain considerations around inclusive design and its wider context. Some were covered, but not at all. So sort of using that example of management and maintenance, I'm going to be talking about certain products, fixtures and fittings, but I guess, so say like a door entry system or a lift, if they're not well maintained or managed, then, they sort of defeat the purpose of being accessible. Also, if people don't know how to use products, within Wandsworth, what we try and do is provide like home user guides or have days where people can come and chat to us, or provide sort of images, easy read, and YouTube videos. But particularly as there's so much kit and things in new build now. And sorry, back to Marnie.
So the guide's structured in 3 parts, and it explains where and why the minimum requirements should be exceeded, but also how this can be achieved. It does this by providing technical guidance, insights, case studies, and numerous examples drawn from Jacques's current practice. Part 1 goes beyond the Part M by providing guidance on the design of the strategic site layout that Jacques saw as a priority in considering the connectivity to the local neighbourhood. Part 2 sets out guidance on general needs housing, and Part 3 on wheelchair accessible housing. Both Parts 2 and 3 are standalone documents to be used in conjunction with the first part. So there is some repetition between the two. So we wanted to make sure that people weren't missing things and having to flip back and forth. Throughout the text, certain terms are highlighted in blue and are explained in a glossary, and the appendices provide references to the wide range of good practice guidance and information that Jack showed on the earlier slide. Next slide, please.
Okay.
The biggest challenge for us that we face in advising on accessible design is getting the message across. And a key priority was to provide the rationale for exceeding the minimum requirements. Our target audience are architects, surveyors, designers, and contractors who are most familiar with technical drawings. So as well as providing detailed explanations in the text, we wanted to use drawings to demonstrate why and where to be more generous with space. We developed a convention using shading with a darker blue as the minimum and the lighter blue for what we considered to be good practice. Next slide, please.
Okay.
We also devised a way to put scale drawings of people using the space to demonstrate why this was needed. Although the architectural technicians who provided the technical drawings were accustomed to working on accessible housing, they didn't have the expertise to add the people in. So we worked with Carly Dixon, an architect with a special interest in inclusive design, to create a range of people with varying abilities that could be added into the drawings. And we brought our own experience of working with disabled people to make sure that these drawings were accurate. The process of developing these drawings, even with people with expertise in designing accessible housing, made us realise how much is still misunderstood by people in the profession. There continues to be a lack of understanding of the impact of what can seem like minor details. So we had to work through sometimes numerous versions of these drawings to get them right. But we're so pleased we did, as it was well worth the effort. These images, we feel, clearly demonstrate where and why more space is needed. Next, please. Another aspect of the guide, alongside the technical drawings and text, is the use of insights that are drawn from experience in practice to explain the reasons for what is being recommended. So, for instance, this drawing demonstrates the need for wall reinforcement and how much stronger it should be, an issue that's commonly misunderstood and often overlooked. The insight explains why strengthening walls, ducts and boxings to full height is needed, but the drawing also shows how we've demonstrated how good visual contrast can be achieved by using darker tiles and white rails. That's also had the benefit of demonstrating how a design could be more attractive and less clinical or institutional in appearance than what we often come across, which is typically full height white tiles. Next, please. We also used photos throughout the guide to show real life examples of key issues and how to achieve different designs, fixtures and fittings in practice. These were mostly provided and sourced by Jacques using examples from current developments. There's a photo here also from Adam Thomas, a kitchen designer who's also a wheelchair user, and other examples of accessible storage and ovens from a company called Symphony Kitchens, which Jacques will share later. It was the difficulties that we had finding photos that represented what we were trying to convey that made us realise why we need a book like this, because actually it tends to be much easier to find pictures that illustrate things are incorrect than ones that demonstrate best practice. And it was also increasingly apparent that many others do not appreciate how critical it was for us that the photos showed the accurate detail that reflected what was actually in the technical guidance. Next, please. There are also a number of personal accounts of the benefits of accessible housing from the perspective of Habinteg residents. And case studies have also been used as another way to provide examples of lessons learnt and different scenarios from Jack's practice in Wandsworth, including where certain products and design features have or haven't worked and why. These are just two examples that Jacques will explain in more detail later. One is how she worked with a company to develop easy to operate handles for balcony doors that had no exterior door handles, and another about using a specialist company that provides bathroom products that are both functional, robust, and adaptable, but are also attractive. So Jax will now explain how her experience in practice has informed the content of the guide.
Thanks, Marnie. It's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but yeah, hang in there. And I'm just really going to take you through just things from my practice that demonstrate the type of lessons learned that have directly informed the guide. And I am aware that there's definitely improvements to be made, and we never stop learning, but hopefully it shows what can be done with attention to detail and just thinking about the end user, which ultimately is all of us. So the guide starts off with strategic site layout, and it's really important to think about where housing development is located, whatever size it is, but how it connects with its surrounding neighbourhood. I'm showing you this because it's an example of certain phases on one estate regeneration where they were really keen to mimic this local sort of London Victorian vernacular, which is called a mansion block, and it often has this sort of grand stepped approach. And luckily, I got on board very near the start where they were discussing how to sort of marry these aesthetics with parts of the site being on a floodplain, so sort of flood mitigation. And I have to say, I guess it was a classic example of form over function, but also a fundamental misunderstanding, not only of the intentions of building regulations, which are to adopt a step-free approach, but really an inclusive and equitable approach too. So as a result, they were proposing splayed steps up to the streets. You can see the pink boxes and the blue arrows. So what they were doing with proposing the stepped approach off the street directly up to all the principal entries on the raised ground floor. But then there was this secondary entrance on the upper level, which was accessed either through the red arrows, so the main sort of communal entrance, or a really circuitous route around to the rear courtyard. But also, just having two entrances into the dwelling meant a really inefficient use of internal space. And what was really concerning at first was that all these, the flats were on the ground floor that were accessed by the stepped approach with the wheelchair units. You'll also see there were these very long slopes into the rear courtyard with sort of narrow cycle stores, and that's something I'll touch on a bit later. So the pink dotted arrows, they really just sort of show this circuitous, the different routes. Again, the red arrow is the communal, blues up to the front entrance. And these are the splayed steps, which I don't think met regs either. So really there were various revisions. They ended up sort of swapping out the wheelchair accessible flats for general needs. But again, I had to sort of point out that it really didn't meet the intentions of not only regulations, but the London plan. And in terms of providing a step-free inclusive approach, but also an aesthetic that visibly excluded and discriminated. And the drawing on the right is a sort of final version where all the steps were removed. Everybody just came in through one communal entrance. The top was private, the bottom was social housing. And then also they broke up the access route into the courtyard. So you had a level landing, slightly wider cycle store, also thinking about it was made larger so that you could have accessible cycles and some scooter storage. But it just was a much more equitable approach. Everybody came in the same way. There were no steps. And just these photos, so the ones on the left show a phase that's just completed, but where two flats either side of the communal entrance had exactly the same sort of external stepped approach. So that was also removed. And then everybody came through the entrance. But the other photos also show how they did still manage to achieve this sort of mansion block aesthetic, where there was direct access. So there wasn't any other access around the back, just direct access to these flats. and because there were less level changes, they were able to just do a really gradual path with level landings. So I guess it just shows things can be achieved with a bit of thought. So then views out and greenery. So when we're considering strategic site layout, it's really important to think about the way the building's orientated to maximise natural daylight and views out, but also without creating glare or overheating, which can additionally impact people, say, who are neurodivergent in terms of sensory regulation, or people with a visual impairment who find glare and reflection difficult. So the left and middle photos show extra care developments I've worked on where they've used these sort of louvre shading and winter gardens. And I note the level threshold on the door to the louvre to the left, which was very good. But also one thing, I mean, nowadays, even with mechanical ventilation heat recovery systems, so that sort of ventilation or vents, people have fed back that they still really like that sort of intuitive, that way of having a separate openable window for ventilation, but also particularly on the ground floor, not here for security. So we always try to provide at least one openable window alongside the door as well. And these photos really show we also need to think about the design of windows and glazing in relation to views out and enhancing light and feelings of well-being. Part M does talk about all new homes have to have glazing heights that start at a maximum of 850 mil. Yeah, I think some people use inches, but from finished floor level. But bizarrely, it only asks for it to be one window in the living room, which clearly is not an inclusive approach, as the photos on the left show. So really what we ask is it applies to at least one window per room so that people can see out, particularly where people might spend extended periods of time seating, lying in bed, but also just for people, for children and people of short stature. And we know the benefits of biophilia and its impact on well-being are well documented. So it's really important these are also taken into account when considering the position of buildings and greenery. And these photos just show a sort of range of different size and types of housing development where greenery is being provided in a range of different ways. So including living roofs, courtyards, through to sort of smaller buffer type planting. And connectivity. So it's, it's really important that the housing development enables people to connect and get out of their local neighborhood, because really you could have the most accessible home, but if you can't get out, then it pretty much defeats the purpose. And I've met people who literally can't get out to work, take their kids to school because of the outside, the sort of public realm and neighborhood. This is just an example of the only road into a housing development. And actually the camber is steeper than it appears. But sadly, this is a classic example where, people are likely to fall into the road, including people using prams and wheelchairs. So that's why we really wanted to show, there are quite a few drawings in the guide showing people and the space, as Marnie's touched on. Another really big barrier to access is to accessing outside spaces, long sloping paths. So often I see like a 1 in 21, 1 in 22 gradient. But instead, really people can roll backwards. They don't have time to sort of stop and rest. So this is really why what we recommend is slightly shorter, steeper actual ramps, but with level landings so that people can pause and rest. And as Marnie mentioned, so the insights in the guide, a lot of them are based on what I called notes in my site briefs. And just when speaking to developers and builders, as soon as you can bring it to life and just sort of explain it from user experience, sometimes hopefully the penny sort of drops as well. And this is an example just really of what I'm talking about. So there was, in the original drawing, there was just a really long sloping path. So I said, could we make it a bit steeper with a level landing? So they're 1 in 15 and large landings. And then they were introducing a seat at the middle bit. There is a very minimal landing on the right, but what happened in practice wasn't actually really what we'd hoped for. So thinking about communal outside space, access to outside space and natural daylight, we know again provides real benefits, even in terms of sort of socializing, space to yourself, time out. But something that's almost always overlooked is seating, and it can literally make the difference between someone using a space or not. And so some of these images might seem okay at first glance. The one on the left obviously needs grass to grow, but they just raise a few common issues, which are inaccessible or no paths to seating, creating this sort of physical and visible barrier. Seating that, whilst it's set off the path, probably could do with an armrest and a backrest, but also just have space alongside. In the last slide, it shows that where you have a bit of space. So if you've got a pram or a wheelchair, you can just sit off the path. And another real issue is thinking about materials for paths. So poorly maintained, sorry, I missed out the middle bench. So yeah, just thinking about maintaining of plants, because obviously that seat is now covered. But yeah, in terms of the suitable surfaces, we tend to try and use bonded gravel, which I know it's more expensive, but it is robust, firm, and actually lasts longer, and is much more easily accessible, unlike the semi-bonded gravel that just gets sort of washed away, and also if people fall on it, it's not very nice, or wood chip, as I've shown here. And I thought I better put some nice examples in as well. I like the one on the right. It's just that opportunity to stop and rest on your way up to an entrance. And I'm aware there's a lot of good practice now, guidance around play, but I do still come across really basic considerations and detail that's missed. So I'm going to show just a couple of slides as food for thought, again, thinking about that level of detail. So this one's an example where the original plans, the pink box top left, they'd actually put the timber stepping logs right over the only path into the seated area. So I asked if they could move it off. And then there was this sort of balancing log at the bottom left, and in the circle is a wood pile. But when it came to being constructed, they put the log pile right beside the balancing log. So needless to say, I asked them to remove it. But again, it's just that attention to detail. This one, it's a wee bit complicated, but it shows a private play area to a small housing development. They did move the lighting bollard and the seat, the F1 and SK, in the left-hand drawing, and the slide is in the pink. And it was supposed to be this sort of gradual slope down without a camber. But what happened in practice was it's it's not that easy to see in the photo, but hopefully the right one, you can see there was really quite a slope, and then on the left there was this steep camber. But also just thinking about the trees over and leaf drop. I mean, that photo was taken not that long ago, so it was in summer, it wasn't even winter or autumn. But because of this, there's one guy that lives in this development who's a wheelchair user, and he's got two children who are autistic, who were really excited about using the slide, but he literally can't take them there now. So again, it sort of defeats the purpose. Another really quick example, the developer proposed this carousel on the left. It was quite steep to get up into, and only enabled one small child to get in. So I'd said, could we just open it up a bit, have a more accessible, inclusive carousel so people can sit and a wheelchair user can get on it. And just where people have their own outside space, again, often people think like large bits of grass and planting. I know it sort of goes back to the greenery, but actually it is about maintenance. I mean, if people choose to have that, then that's actually fine. But I think sometimes it's about giving choice to somebody. The image on the photo on the bottom left, I had asked for more paving to be put down when it was being built. I then visited the man who moved in, and he's now getting his brother to extend the paving because he can't. It's wood chip and planting. So yeah, sadly that sort of supported what I'd said, and obviously people don't always listen to what I ask them to do. On the right, it's just some planting to the edge or raised planting. The lady in the bottom right is going to plant vegetables, so she says. Thinking about communal amenities, like I said, there's this sort of long path, so having the level landings. But on this was a cycle store that was quite narrow with no level landings, and then eventually what we end up with was a larger cycle store with space for accessible recumbent cycles and mobility scooter storage with one level entry point. And then this is a development we're currently looking at where it was just a cycle store, but now they've sort of swapped it around a bit. So we've got a cycle store with space for accessible bikes and then a separate mobility store. Thinking about communal amenities, refuse bins is just such a biggie, particularly for blocks of flats where you have these big Euro bins, and people end up just having to leave rubbish in front where they can't lift it up. I don't know about the one on the right with the openable front. I've never seen that in use. Some places have street level, but obviously you have to have a sort of under basement bin. I think that's more like a streetscape thing. I put the other bins in, again, just thinking about outside space. There's never any bins as well as seats. So that's really important too. It's a bit easier probably if it's your own property to have bins, but again, it's just a really big issue. So if anyone invents an accessible Euro bin, you're probably onto the money there. And going back to the development I talked about before, where there was this sort of raised ground floor, there were three blocks. The one that had the height discrepancy, or the biggest one, we actually decided to try out. It's called a hopper system. It's a bit of a throwback in Britain. I don't know about elsewhere. Some sort of 50, 60 blocks of flats had these, but this is on the ground floor in a sort of accessed beyond a separate lobby, but it drops through to the bin where the bin folk come in and collect it. And the architect drew up these drawings. So far, so good, but people are only just sort of moving in, so I've yet to find out. Again, just thinking about signage and wayfinding doesn't take a lot to think about it, but it's really important. These are predominantly of the development we've just finished. So I really like the sign that goes around the corner in terms of wayfinding. The number on the left is for an individual property, but it means it's tactile as well. And then just thinking about nice pictograms that are very, very clear. Again, quite simple, doesn't have to be complicated. Accessible height post, but post that is clearly identifiable. So again, providing that visual contrast numbering. The one on the left, you'll notice the numbering's a bit askew, but that's because the wheelchair accessible post boxes are at the bottom. And again, thinking about ironmongery, color schemes, visual contrast, these are just sort of a few nice images, and lighting, just ways to assist with wayfinding as well. Parking. Now, parking is certainly a massive issue for us, and often, certainly in London, there is very limited parking available, and it depends what people are used to as well. So it's really important one thing I want to show in the guide was this, having a really good drop-off area, whether it's got drop curbs, flush curb. The one on the right is a flush curb. There are actually two parking bays for people in this block of flats, and there's a completely flush curb, so people don't have to go out into the road. But the way we've delineated that is through the use of different types of paving. And again, going on from this sort of flush curb, the top right shows where we did rectify it. The middle image, it's hard to make out, but there was a dropped curb, and we changed that. With the flush curb, though, now comes the I'm just sort of thinking about EV charging and something to stop people banging into the EV chargers. But one thing I really also wanted to get across is, whilst it is about physical access, sometimes proximity to someone's home can actually make the difference between them being able to live there or not. This particular image in the middle, the family that live in the property closest to that bay, that is their bay, but other people were parking there. But one of the family members is a wheelchair user, but he also becomes extremely distressed if he can't get straight to that van. He will kick, scream, shout. So it's really quite upsetting, obviously, both for him and for the family. So for them, that really was a deal breaker to move into that property. But as I said, the issue then is about how do you designate bays. Some boroughs I've worked in, they will designate a particular bay to a flat. Wandsworth won't. So they're putting up these bollards, which work, but obviously they aren't really particularly accessible. And also they seem to suddenly introduce these sort of rubber stoppers. The residents said they were okay. I was a bit concerned if someone is like having to come in the back into a wheelchair accessible, one of the sort of vans. But the reason they did that was to stop people driving onto that path that goes into the play area. And again, getting involved right at the start, thinking about structural columns. Obviously on the left is where it went wrong. The right one is where we did map it all out, but also height of where you're thinking of, but also sort of garages, podium, undercroft. The permitted is a bit low. That's why we showed the dotted line in blue. So if you've got one of these WAV, wheelchair accessible vehicles, the boot might hit off the top. Entrances. Now, negotiating doors with closers and door thresholds really are one of the biggest barriers to access, as I'm sure probably all of us know. And I can't stress how much it means. And it goes back to that point about literally people being able to get out their home or not. And again, it's not just about wheelchair users, but people pushing prams, carrying shopping, tradespeople, people with poor balance or limited strength. So it's really all of us. And surprisingly, Part M only refers to certain door door pressures and door opening degrees, which require automation of communal doors, but only for wheelchair housing. So it's only really through luck and the fact that a lot of our developments are a bit bigger, or will always have a wheelchair accessible unit, that our developments by default doors are automated. But also nowadays, fire and security requirements often mean additional doors with fire closers for protected fire lobbies, lobbies for post, and other security measures. In the UK, we have something called secured by design. There's different categories of it, but there's something called compartmentalization and meet and greet policies, where a person is really required to leave their property to meet and let visitors in. So to try and overcome these issues, including people sort of ramming doors and propping them open, we recommend automation just as standard to all communal doors, but also the provision of video entry so that people can see and communicate with visitors and really decide whether to let someone in or not. But due to all these different considerations, it's really important that all the door sets, including ironmongery, what automation you're using, door entry systems, are discussed with all the relevant people right from the start. So that includes your fire consultants, Design Out Crime, door entry company. But again, that's when you can get it right, because often then it's too late, or there's real pushback to fit it, because obviously it costs more. I touched on about Part M not only applying to communal doors for wheelchair accessible housing, so it doesn't actually cover private external entrance doors. So that can be from the street as well. And something that's almost always overlooked is door pressures can't be tested until a building is built and complete. So it almost never happens. Our last development, we had 16 wheelchair units, and I literally had to get someone out to test them all, and they all failed. So because they refused to fit it from the outset, so they have now had to fit them all, retrofit. But so that's why we recommend full automation to both communal and private entrance doors, certainly of wheelchair accessible homes, but also via a remote key fob that activates the door on approach, so that a person doesn't have to touch a fob on the wall with hands-free video. And again, just to remind people, certainly if you're looking at systems, it rather than retrofit, if you retrofit, sometimes it can negate fire or security warranties as well. I've just realized what I should be saying once, that all of this is also in the inclusive housing design guide. Thresholds, door thresholds are also one of the biggest barriers to access and the most misunderstood element, certainly of Part M. I'm guessing it's elsewhere as well. And I just so often get told they can't be achieved, the products don't exist, or frustratingly, manufacturers advertise them as ADM compliant when they aren't. And even the smallest upstand creates a tripping hazard, and difficulties, as we know, of people with poor balance, proprioception, but as well as a barrier for smaller wheels on wheelchairs, walkers, and prams. But also where people just don't have the strength or ability to use their upper body to push. I've also seen people having to tip backwards to get over, which has caused extreme distress. And Marnie and I were really keen to have a good drawing in the guide, but sadly, even the architects doing the drawings told Marnie and I, oh no, you can't get a level threshold. So I then had to send photos, product specifications, including the zero threshold that we put into Wandsworth a couple of years ago. But it really just highlighted the challenges to Marnie and I about the importance of attention to detail, and I guess the need to sort of challenge the status quo. So I'm just going to show a few examples. Again, as we explain in the insight and in the guide, it is sometimes about detailing on site until obviously you get the levels on site, it's quite difficult. So the one on the left, I visited site and then they had to adjust it to suit. These are private front entrances. So the one on the left is a zero threshold. It's got like a drop down seal and a linear drainage. I went back after a year and 2 years later and absolutely no water ingress, so it's fine. And then just showing examples of other private entrance doors. And then these are balcony doors, again, just showing how it can be achieved. Sometimes detailing on site doesn't always happen how you want it to. So you end up with this sort of infill thing. And when I asked, the top left one was quite recently with an extra care housing development, and I said to the developer, like, would you have this in your home? But obviously he said no, so I think he was a bit ashamed. Flooring, I mean, in the guide, we go into more detail in terms of acoustics, low VOC, non-adhesive and recyclable flooring, but this just really shows the need for smooth transitions. I wouldn't normally recommend carpet, particularly not light coloured, but obviously it can be a choice. And also avoiding sudden changes in colour, which can be perceived as a visual barrier with people with visual or cognitive impairments and might cause them to stop and freeze. Marnie mentioned this case study, but I'll just say balcony doors with no handles do seem to be a frequent design feature. But for me, it also highlighted this sort of classic developer pushback where they said, oh, where in Part M does it say you need a door handle? Which really misunderstands what we're trying to achieve, and they did have to give in the end. So these are some of the solutions. What manufacturers seem to have as a solution were these sort of fingertip grips. So I had to sort of push back, and the solutions on the right were cranked pull handles. They're cranked by 45 degrees. It's hard to see, but again, that really helped where people avoid brushing their sort of knuckles. But again, these things need to be considered really from the outset, because it might negate door warranties, and slim frames might not even be able to accommodate these handles. So vertical circulation, moving on. In London, now part of our London plan policy and post Grenfell fire, we have to look at providing both. Well, we always look at 2 lifts to above ground floor, but we're now looking at having a firefighting and fire evacuation lift. So it's about clearly labelling that as well. The photo on the right is an older development. The one on the left and the lift intercom, lift evacuation intercom. So what we're now introducing is an actual communication system. So if someone is in the protected lift lobby, they can communicate and come back to a sort of central call center. I mean, realistically, obviously, we don't have concierges, so it's about being able to communicate. Unfortunately, what they did was they put this lift intercom far too high. I haven't found any reason why it needs to be that high. So again, it's just sort of one of those lessons learnt. Thinking about lifts in internal lifts in dwellings, what we also recommend is an enclosed lift. So the one shown on the right, the one on the left is a traditional sort of 2-story lift in the UK, but actually you can only have, excuse me, one person seated. So if someone needs someone to assist them or becomes anxious or distressed, really obviously that doesn't meet the need. So again, a bit of thought from the outset, and just thinking about the relationship of where the lift is. Again, so this drawing is just for general housing, but it raises a couple of consideration. One of my pet hates is stairs with winders as opposed to straight stairs. So that curved stair. And I know they save space, but really people are much more likely to slip and fall. But also something as OTs that we're acutely aware of is that curved stairs mean a more expensive, sort of time-consuming bespoke stair lift, which can't be reused or recycled in the same way that a straight track can. But also straight stairs provide that sort of clear sight line up the stairs, and particularly with banister rails, they can provide that visual contrast and wayfinding. And the other issue that's mentioned in this insight, and it's often overlooked and just not really thought about, is I very often see designs that have a doorway literally opening over the top of a stair, so that somebody might fall down the stair, particularly if you're getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom or something. And again, it's something, if you look at the designs really early on, it can usually be flipped, but obviously once it's built, it's too late. Windows. So one thing I want to show really was the need for fully furnished layouts. I'll touch on it in bedrooms in a minute. But bizarrely also Part M only asks for 750 wide for both sort of general needs and wheelchair accessible housing. So we really wanted to show the space needed for someone to approach a window. We're also just in Wandsworth, and we do mention it in the guide, but these it's really important that window handles are robust and can be locked easily, not the ones that have sort of a bit fiddly and have to be put in different positions. But we're also now fitting these additional window restrictors, which are extremely robust, can only be opened with a key and prevent the window opening more than 100 millimeters. So this can really help where children or other people that are prone to climb and try and sort of pull on windows. And again, M4, so general M42 and M43 only requires the handle in the living room to be accessible, a bit like the window, slightly different heights, but if they are exceeded, a remote opening device fitted. But again, like glazing, it really is a non-inclusive approach. So we recommend that at least one window in each room is easily accessible. And again, this goes back to the point about specifying products at early design stages. Things like window transoms will impact on elevations and aesthetics from a sort of planning approval perspective. And sometimes we've had to go back to planners when the windows actually haven't met Part M. Photo on the left shows a really bulky, clunky, clinical looking winding handle. The ones on the right are electric winders that we use predominantly in our wheelchair accessible homes, because that's usually where the height exceeds it. And so blinds, we are gifting basic roller blinds in our new builds, mainly due to cost and aesthetics, but obviously they're really important for people who need to be able to control the amount of light entering a room. However, due to anti-ligature requirements, it means the cords have to be fixed at height, so they're really hard to reach. So these are some of the solutions that we're testing, trialing the 3 middle ones. The 2 on the right are probably more bespoke options, but they don't necessarily have to cost a lot, certainly the automated roller blind. So living, kitchen, dining, feedback generally from people has been they prefer some sort of separation between the kitchen and living room, or at least the choice and flexibility to be able to do so. So where possible, design should try and enable separation, and really it can provide quite a wide range of benefits. So just delineating spaces to provide a clear view of what the room's purpose is and its function. But reducing things like discomfort and distraction from the hum and buzz of electrical appliances, noisy fans, sound of food preparation and eating, and also food smells. It can reduce safety concerns, such as adults supervising a child in an open area where they might run into the kitchen, but also providing people with a quiet space in the living room, including like children doing homework, and providing separation for faith and cultural considerations. And where kitchens are separate from the living room, they should have a combined kitchen diner so that people can transfer hot food and drinks between the surfaces. Again, this is just a sort of example of a similar wheelchair accessible layout. The one on the right is a duplex wheelchair accessible, but also generally what we find, if it's a larger property, you do tend to have the separate kitchen diner. But again, it's important to have the dining and the kitchen together. Kitchens, kitchens and bathrooms are massive, and obviously I'm really sort of skirting through this. There's a lot more information in the guide, but certainly Part M for general accessible and adaptable housing has virtually no information, no detail. And Marnie, I were really keen that it should show good practice examples, but particularly around things like providing a waist height oven and hob, as we do as is required for wheelchair dwellings, but it's also really standard in private developments or in our own homes. So it doesn't just provide a nicer aesthetics, but it avoids people having to bend down to lift hot, heavy items out of freestanding cookers, and often dirt gets trapped down either side. And the next couple of slides, I'm really just going to briefly show 2 configurations for wheelchair accessible kitchens that do require a bit more space. But just to say one particular thing that's often misunderstood is that you must have one single linear section of worktop. You mustn't have separate like hob and sink, so that people can safely drag items across, and then you can use the space more easily. This is like so frequently misunderstood. Sorry, that one shows a straight worktop. This one shows the corner, and in fact, the corner can be more effective because you can sort of lean either side. This the photo on the right also shows an accessible oven. Unfortunately, Part M has dimensions for a very low oven that is you just couldn't get a wheelchair under, and in fact is unsafe. So it is sometimes a bit of an issue trying to explain to developers, but that's where hopefully the guide sort of provides that sort of backup and user insights. And there, in terms of the actual rise and fall mechanism, I guess there are 3 main types. Excuse me, the one on the left is your sort of fixed bracket that obviously isn't adjustable in situ, and it doesn't have the back panels that we always insist on sort of for aesthetics. And so you can see sort of exposed pipe, wires hanging down, but also because of the horizontal pipe work, obviously it's not going to be able to lower down. Also wall unit is really high and that oven is super low. The two on the right, we try and always ask and recommend electric rise and fall because it's much easier to operate up and down. The middle one is the sort of, sometimes people still insist on providing this sort of winding handle. The handles dig into your tummy if you're a wheelchair user. They get lost, they're like an Allen key and fall out, but they're actually really hard because you're lifting the whole worktop. Um, Again, just thinking about base units, often it's difficult to see what's in them and you have to lift and reach out. So really just thinking about pull-out units, and just taller, lower units. And this one on the left shows a taller but lower wall unit, things like pull down baskets and see-through cupboards so that you can see what's in the cupboard. And this just shows, like, there's obviously a whole plethora of appliances. Unfortunately, we so far I've not been unable to use the slide and hide oven, which is great because you can get right up to it. And but even just small details. So the top right ceramic hob, clear, easy to use knobs, markers, and actually it does have what's called residual heat indicators. So it lights up when the ring is on. So there are some really basic quick fixes to Symphony have a lot of fantastic designs and appliances as well. But also I'm aware that I've just touched the surface. So there's a lot more in the guide in terms of like visual contrast, fixtures and fittings, switches and controls. Bedrooms, I'm really just gonna show the importance of showing fully furnished layouts, so that you can see how someone moves just in between the furniture and gets to the window. Again, so often I just see a layout that literally has a double bed and two bedside tables. Um, oh, okay. Oh, and is that all right? Oh, don't know what's happened. Can everybody see? Oh, hello? Oh, am I okay? Okay, okay, I could just hear you. Sorry. Um, and so this is a similar principle for the wheelchair accessible bedrooms, but particularly in terms of just demonstrating people using the space. And as we know, quite often wheelchair users or just disabled people in general end up with so much kit and extra bits and pieces. So even the minimum is really important. Interestingly, Part M for wheelchair users doesn't even ask for a turning circle. It just has this sort of 1200 by 1200 square. So again, we were really keen to sort of show the space that you do actually need to move around. Bath and shower rooms, again, another biggie. Um, Now, the one on the left is I visited another flat with some of our residents. It was not one of our developments, I'm glad to say, but this is just so typical, where manufacturers or contractors just sort of use this off the shelf public toilet type specification. But when I say, would you want that in your own home? Obviously, they say no. But I also do strongly feel this sort of perpetuates this myth about accessibility looking clinical, and the lack of general willingness, because that's what they think it's going to end up with. But obviously, with a bit of thought and input, there are so many different attractive, flexible, inclusive fixtures and fittings with visual contrast that you can do and decent lighting. And as we know, it really provides feeling of well-being, and just sort of feeling valued, I guess. Marnie touched on the wall strengthening, often overlooked and misunderstood. It isn't just about rails, but you can have more attractive wall-mounted basins, wall-hung shower seats, but also where people are heavier or people might jump and pull on items. It just means things are much more robust. And having worked with Huey, and we had engineers test our wall strengthening in accordance with Part M on our last development. So we do ask for what's called 30 to 50 patching or equivalent. And often builders band about this 18mm, but having seen it fail, I just know that that is not sufficient. And also, you really need to have quality fixtures and fittings. This is our general adaptable bathroom, and one thing we were really keen to do was to show in all the technical sort of sanitary facility drawings was pipe work and stacks outside of the room, so clear of circulation space and access. Just really also, I mean, I just never see it in drawings. So, but what you end up needing is a larger footprint. And again, that's almost often overlooked. And so that will impact on the rest of the layout of the whole property. And this, as I said, this example is of the adaptable bathroom from lessons learned in Wandsworth, where the basin doesn't overlap the shower. And there is a case study in the guide. These are just a few more photos that show some of the different ways we've explored how to fit genuinely adaptable showers under baths. So the bath can just be taken away, really. And the case study, these are a couple of the elevations, but it shows the photo on the left, and feedback generally has been really good, but I was trying not to move the shower controls, but I've realized the optimal layout is to have the seat to the back wall so people can stretch their legs out, really. And in the guide, there was two main shower bathroom layouts for wheelchair accessible housing. So I've stuck with them really so that we can show how small the space is. The number of times builders say, oh, you know, the room's really big, but actually once you get someone in there, it really isn't. So there are two main layouts. One shows, because you should be able to fit a bath over the shower. Again, that's often misunderstood. People don't even provide a shower gully. They just have a bath. And also what we've done for some people is actually through the regen is put, for one child, we put a shower stretcher where that space for the seat would be. And again, just thinking about sort of tonal contrast and fixtures and fittings. This is the other plan drawing of the other layout. So again, just showing you how someone really uses that space. And part M has minimum heights and projections for toilet pans, but for wheelchair access, it also asks for flush handles. Again, something that's often overlooked. So I've only really managed to source one toilet, the one shown that doesn't look too institutional. I have the sort of really large public toilet type handles on the left. So actually we're providing those toilets in all our new build. We've also found the little tab. So where people don't like to touch and lift a whole seat, they can just do the edge. And a company that I have no affiliation, I'm not paid by them, but they are the only company that I've found. They're a German company called Heavy, in German Huey, HEW. So they are the only company that I can find that actually provide shower seats without legs that can adjust in height in situ. So they're either fixed to the wall or can be hung on a rail system, as shown on the one on the right. And they look attractive, but critically also they're made of this sort of molded polyurethane, so the covers don't split, and they don't have these sort of plastic covered metal legs that rust and get in the way. And we've also found, we had one family where one of the members had a pica, so they would sort of pick and try to eat things. So this really helped with that as well. And again, I know I've missed out a lot of detail with kitchens, but hopefully it just gives you a flavour of some of the things that really need considering. Lighting, again, another biggie. And I think when I was developing my site briefs and then thinking about the Inclusive Housing Design Guide, I spoke to people who are undertaking lighting research, and I think I realised I was probably overcomplicating matters, and I'll talk about it on the last slide for lighting. But particularly where I couldn't use more expensive solutions, and that fundamentally it's really about choice and control. And as I say, this insight explains why it is so important. And it's really intuitive. I think we all know what lighting we find welcoming and comforting. So you'll see on the left, the kitchen task lighting, they were like separate bulbs. So they really cast confusing pools of light, as opposed to the linear strip on the right. Ceiling track spotlights are also really common in kitchens and create real glare, but they're actually difficult to adjust and replace the bulbs, which is why we've been looking at the ceiling luminaires, and in fact we're putting some of them in our utility cupboards as well. But also the top left photo shows ceiling spotlights, and that was something I was really keen to include, but actually we didn't have dimmer switches, so there wasn't that compatibility and adjustability. But also it really made me realize that, again, you really have to look at small power layouts, to look at zoning, and make sure that switches are intuitive and appropriate to their location. So in one, it was a really small living area, they'd put 12 spotlights. So yeah, I guess it is about that over provision. So going back to my previous point, I think providing appropriate lighting that enables choice and control, aside from the task areas, bathrooms and kitchens, it probably makes best sense from a sort of basic point of view to look at things like pendant lamps, up and down lighters, and just thinking about fully furnished layouts where alongside small power layouts to ensure sockets are appropriately positioned for lamps so that they don't create a tripping hazard. But the other thing is, luckily, I mean, things are really moving on. So cordless lamps are available pretty cheaply nowadays too. So utilities and MEP, I mean, now with new build, there's just so much sort of kit. And as this highlight explains, the optimal place really for mechanical ventilation, heat and recovery, and heat interface units, and all those sort of other systems, so like your consumer units, is to put them in an easily accessible utility cupboard, so off the hallway. What I introduced a few years ago are these other companies are available, hydraulic shutoff valves, which are easier to use than standard stopcocks and really can be positioned anywhere. So here what we try and do is put them to the front of utility cupboards, but another example where we fitted them at height was outside a bathroom where one of the family members, he was a wheelchair user, but he also loved to play with water. He was autistic and he would spend hours sitting in the shower. So it was important that there was an element of control, I guess, for the people assisting him. So we put them outside the shower room and up at height so that they could turn it off. The photo on the right again shows different types of MVHR units and thinking about the height and location. So those grey two tabs that you see are pull-out filters that you need to clean. So one is easier to reach, the other isn't. So again, just thinking about what goes where, but you have to. We do mock-ups of the utility cupboards right at the outset of design, and most plant engineers now have a sort of special not capsule, cubicle that they'll use. Again, traditionally in the UK, our washing machines are in the kitchen. I know that's not the case everywhere, but they can create noise, hum, and vibration. But also, it's really not very private or dignified or hygienic. If someone's taking soiled clothing into a kitchen. So we now try and put them into utility cupboards, but also paying attention to where they are within the utility cupboard so that they're easily accessible and don't block sockets and switches. And again, if we know, and that is a recommendation in the guide, but also if we know a particular resident, so the image on the drawing on the right, we put an additional plumbing for a washing machine for a resident just off his bedroom due to being sort of doubly incontinent. And so heating, underfloor heating is generally preferred, not just aesthetically, but it increases circulation space. But particularly, I thought we'd moved away from it. But recently I saw these sort of really ugly, bulky radiator covers, and some developers still seem to insist on providing them in terms of low surface temperature, but actually they also really cut down the amount of heat emitting. But there are other solutions available, and I guess where someone's unclothed, so predominantly the bathroom, are the important areas. So the two photos on the right are of low surface temperature towel radiators that do the same thing, really. Those covers, I've also seen them in the past where they rust underneath in wet floor shower rooms. So what I ask for now is top mounted controls. That's for all our housing. But you think that would be straightforward, but you have to even think about the positioning of the controls so they don't stick out or they don't go like the one in the socket, they don't cross over a socket. So yeah, you think you've solved one problem, but there's always other ones that come up. And then just finally, thinking about controls. I mean, I'm just acutely aware that it's really standard in private housing that we use much more attractive sockets and switches and controls that can really provide that sort of visual contrast. So we really need to move away from that white on white. But that said, I've actually had real difficulty sourcing a manufacturer that our electrical department approves that has everything in the same range. So whether that's large rocker plate switches, your TV aerials, outboard rocker switches with USB points. So yeah, so again, it's about that attention to detail. Also just thinking about labeling. That top right photo is in a kitchen where there was the fan boost for the MVHR unit, but to the left, that was the task lighting, but there's no way you would have known it was that. So just thinking about labeling as well. Yes, finally, thank you so much for listening. I'm really aware there's a lot to digest, so hopefully people can go back, look at the slides, and it gives you a flavour of the detail that's in the guide. Obviously, Marnie and I are happy to take questions, but if people don't want to do it now, you're more than welcome to email us as well. So, phew, sorry. Back to you.
Thank you. That was indeed a tour de force, and you must be ready to take a sip of water.
Yes, I am.
Really a reminder for this extraordinarily generous set of images. Please don't use them without permission. So you've got Jacquel's email right there. Just if you wish to use something, please just let her know. She also has the Center for Accessible Environments as an option for buying the book. I strongly urge you to buy the book there because there is a curious problem with, at least there has been, in buying it over Amazon. And there's a very poor quality version of it that shows up on Amazon. So beware. The book is of extremely high quality.
Thank you.
In paper
and
quality.
In color. And
yes, it's terrific. So don't go to Amazon for this one. Okay, so just want to make sure. And I also want to, I want to, before we begin I want to absolutely get to people, and I'm delighted there's still 140 people with us, even after an hour and a half.
Oh my goodness, I would have thought it dropped off.
And I want to thank you in every possible way that you added pictures of good design. It is heartbreakingly prevalent that we have an abundance of issues of bad design. So definitely. Our thanks indeed. I also think one of the things that really struck me is the attention to furnishing and to anticipating furnishing. It is astonishing how often we don't plan on furnishing in relation to heating and lighting and windows and what have you. So extra thanks for those. Now I think we need to give the floor to our audience and see what kinds of questions people have. And a reminder to everybody, we'd like you to use the Q&A rather than chat. So let me go to Q&A. We've got a start here for sure. A question we're going to defer to our colleague in Japan, who always has good questions. Nat Hosno wants to know about positioning the toilet thinking not only about wheelchair users and people with mobility limitations, but also about blind people, and about the predictability of locations of toilets. As you know, our Japanese colleagues are deep content experts on toilets. So we'll start with the toilet question. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I might also hand over to Marnie for this. I mean, there are certainly in Part M, it's very prescriptive in terms of toilet, but also I really think that's where sort of lighting, visual contrast, just not that white on white. I mean, oh, certainly on the extra care, sort of older persons housing development. I know Marnie's done a lot of work on this. There is that whole thing about sight lines. So if it's an ensuite bathroom, but in terms of general needs housing, I just think it's that whole, yeah, just thinking about visual contrast, using yeah, just about the materials you go. But that's where I suppose also having that familiarity, if the positioning is generally the same. But I would also say that whole sort of clean lines thing, not having lots of pipe work, confusing things that get in the way. Marnie, have you got anything else to add?
No, I think that's one of the things we were particularly keen that, Jack's mentioned, was that if you look at the drawings, a lot of the guidance we get doesn't take account of the plumbing and the pipe work and things, and assumes that so then the space gets smaller and it gets more cluttered. But yes, certainly
Yeah.
the other aspect in relation to sightlines in when I've worked in retirement housing is this notion that if you've got an ensuite bathroom, you position the toilet so that people can see it from the head end of the bed. If the door's left open, it's something that makes it more intuitive, especially for people living with dementia. So there are those issues as well to consider. But we're hoping that the drawings in the guide are much clearer, and show what should be done, because some of the guidance is a bit difficult to interpret.
Thank you. We'll go into another one. Let me just comment on the drawings that include the people. We're very, very grateful for that. That was worth the effort, whatever it took, and it must have taken a lot.
Thank you. Oh, yes. But yeah, it was very painful, but hopefully
Yeah.
there just isn't anything else like that. And so often people think these spaces are big when they're just not. And it is also like, I mean, I can't say enough about pipe work and stacks, because yeah, people always overlook that as well. So you do need a bit more space, but it gives you those sleeker lines and ultimately nicer designs. But yeah, so often I just see drawings with, well, in fact, I don't know if I ever see any
Well,
with
and
plumbing
I think
until I ask for it.
you've also been attentive to it's not just wheelchairs. I mean, the mobility limitations are a vast variety, and it's really 10 times more prevalent than actual wheelchair users. So it's very important designed to anticipate.
And also, I think one thing we really wanted to get across was this someone's assisted, because a lot of people need that supervision, somebody just alongside them. And you're quite right. It isn't just about wheelchair users, and that was something I mean, yes, it does need more space, but one thing we were really keen to show was just a range of people.
We have a question specific to space, and Francisco Lasta is asking, spatial constraints in renovation projects, especially older building. I would also add adaptive reuse is one of the challenges. Thoughts on that in terms of wider clearances and turning areas?
I mean, yeah, I think again, it goes back to why Marnie and I were so keen to show people. I mean, I know this is for new builds, but one thing we always try and say is hopefully it demonstrates it can be a baseline to use for home modifications. And I guess if you've got limited space, maybe it's about efficient use of space and things like the pipe work and the sanitary ware that you use. But I think what we were hoping is by showing people in the space that, I guess, if something really doesn't work, it's not going to work. I mean, there is always compromise, but you know, as OTs and adaptations, we always know about compromise. And like I say, this was new builds, but I hopefully, I know it sounds a bit weird, but it almost demonstrates where it just doesn't work and why. Marnie, is anything, is that?
No, I think that's the thing. Not and yeah, those are the real challenges, the ones where you're dealing with an existing building and you
Yeah.
can't start from scratch. And you know, I think we're learning all the time. Some older schemes I've worked on where there have been very sort of small bedsit type arrangements for retirement living, where they've literally you know, in recognition of the need for space, have knocked 2 units together and made a bigger space. There's, you know, that it gets to that point where you know, you have to kind of be able to also say where you can't compromise. I think it's about prioritizing where you really can't compromise. Yeah.
We have a question from Mary Pulowski, who is asking about outdoor and indoor seating. Have you seen options for taller heights mixed in with standards? So many people have limited leg strength, etc., and there seems to be a gap addressing this in public spaces. We feel very strongly this is a huge issue. The number of people who have to rise using their upper body, for example. So what's your thought on that?
I mean, I mean, it's a really good point. I know certainly I sit on a British Standards committee group, and although BS 8300 is being reviewed, I know it does generally ask for a range of type and height of seating. So some, like, where possible we do, but I think, you know, I think that is it's a really good point and something that we need to bear in mind. And I'm pretty sure, yeah, the British standards do talk about having a range, or just general good practice, because let's face it, we're all different height. I suppose maybe the main thing is just, I was going to say, not being too low, but then again, that's where I think choice and flexibility is about, yeah, just offering a choice.
I've occasionally come across, but yes, it's that I think that's what we really want to be able to do is yeah, to highlight these issues so that designers and architects will respond and come up with solutions. But that I have occasionally seen where you might have a situation outside where there's a longer seating area that's then that rises and falls at different heights, you know, which is the sort of ideal. That's one solution that can look really attractive, but it's kind of, that's where we need the designers to respond to these issues, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that everybody seems to be very concerned about is being able to get the book shipped outside of the UK. And I had no trouble getting it. I actually bought mine. My copies have come from RIBA. CAE is another source, but no difficulty getting them shipped to the US or to anywhere in the world, I don't think. I will put both of those addresses into the chat so people can find them. One of the things that I think we also want to at least touch on has to do with work that you have been doing, given your extraordinary experience over a long period of time, is making the case, the financial case, the economic case for why this matters. And I think, I know that that's not an easy answer, but just, it is particularly for those of us that have some opportunity to speak to the priority on public funding, that making the financial case is critically important. So add your wisdom to that, concern.
You've reminded me, because I completely forgot to say, one of the, or a couple of the case studies do talk about the benefits in terms of sort of the cost around adaptability for a bath and shower. But a colleague of mine in Wandsworth, another housing OT, has been doing some work. So she did an exercise. One of them predominantly was looking at wheelchair accessible housing. And I think we had worked on was about 80 flats. But just taking into account, so her post came about because she ended up spending adaptation budgets. So budget that should have gone to adaptation, she ended up having to go into new build housing, and basically they had to spend I think it was about 25 to 30 UK pounds adapting each property, and there was 8 or 10 of them. So, you know, one of them paid for her job, but she's doing a bit more work around that, and she's worked out that she reckons just by both our roles and only on the wheelchair accessible housing, we've saved anything up between sort of about 1 million and 1.2 million pounds, just through, and that doesn't even take into account. I mean, there's quite a lot of research in Britain that talks about, and again, Habinteg have done a lot about benefits to the public purse, and they have literally costed in terms of what buildings cost to build, cost to public purse, but then and that's one thing we really tried to get across in the technical housing standards review, but because we had like literally finance people sitting there costing everything, but what they didn't cost were the qualitative. So we were saying, what about, you know, reduced hospital discharge, people being able to stay at home, being able to stay in your home longer, and certainly those the adapt. So where we're putting all our baths now have those wet floor showers under the bath, and I think we reckon to adapt it probably costs around between 500 and £1,000, depending on when you do it. So probably 1,000. But for a standard shower adaptation, it's about £8,000 or £9,000. So if I can't remember off the top of my head, but we're building like hundreds of flats. So we're acutely aware of that. So it is something that my colleague has certainly run with, but we reckon between us, we've saved the council about £2 million. But you're right. People just don't listen. They don't, not don't care, but qualitative. How do you measure quality? But that's where I definitely say to folk to look at Habinteg's website as well. They a lot of really good work around that, and say, you know, people getting to work, all that type of thing.
And I think it is coming up with measures that speak to issues of well-being and stability. And I think if we look at populations, particularly that large spectrum of people with mental or brain-based reasons for disability, that is an absolute priority that we figure that out and really recognize that wheelchair housing is critically important, but it is only one aspect of what we're talking about. And this is not always about more real estate, it's more thought. And it's more attention to what kinds of decisions are made early on, partly because we're really looking, you know,
and
acoustics
also,
and lighting in particular.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, how do you measure that? But certainly, so for, like I say, for the UK, one of the biggest adaptation, and that's just general housing, nothing, you know, not to do with wheelchair housing, is the sort of bath out, having a wet floor shower. I mean, what we're doing now that residents are seeing what the showers look like or what they are, we're getting a much more uptake. So people are literally asking for showers before they move in. So we'll just put a shower in from the outset, and we've got like a show flat where they'll come see. So again, it's just, I think, you know, people turn down adaptations of work because of that aesthetic thing, or, you know, don't want people to come and visit. So that there is a lot of stuff around qualitative. And again, foundations, there's something called bath out. There's quite a lot of research. I mean, I'm sure between myself and Marney we can pull some things together around, but that, you know, that evidence is cost savings around adaptations, but it's showing how that transfers across to just general housing, but new housing. And that's where having our roles in from the start, so that whole door automation, like automating 16 doors, I know that was wheelchair entrances, but things like that but also sometimes you just, if you don't get in at the start, it can't be done. Like, you can't retrofit it, or you negate, like I say, fire and security warranties. So yeah, I mean, there's a massive interesting piece of work to be done, and sadly I suppose people don't listen, and unless it's about money. But again, when I speak to build it. Sorry, I was going to say, like when I speak to people about tiles and floor and wall coverings, it just it doesn't cost any more. It really doesn't. But so why do we put like white tiles and stuff in? But yeah, sorry, Marney.
Oh, just, I mean, this is going back a few years, but and could still be relevant in a way, is that there was a big piece of work that was done about a sort of cost benefit analysis of the lifetime home standards, which that there are differences in the category too. But what was really interesting about that, because it kind of addressed some of the pushback from the housing developers who, you know, are interested in, you know, the literal space, now I've forgotten the word for it, but the footprint, which, and it demonstrated, what was really interesting about it was that it demonstrated the footprint isn't significantly larger. It's the design of the layout, and if those key elements, like a wider hall and an easier and a straight stair and those sorts of things, were put in, that they're them, and they, you know, like lifetime home standards demonstrated, this wasn't just about older or disabled people. It was about managing a family throughout life, and it was a really interesting piece of work because it did show that it wasn't a significant extra cost, and that's the sort of evidence we need, really, isn't it? You know,
I think we need, yes, we need more of it, and we need it to be readily available.
I also think like there's a really big marketing opportunity. Like we have sort of energy rating systems in the UK, and years ago there was research done about lifetime homes in Northern Ireland, where they went back and spoke to people, and a lot of people liked the features, but they didn't actually know it was lifetime homes. So if you say, oh, you know, about positive marketing, like estate agents or you know, and I do a bit of work with some private developers, and often once they get on board and realize it, you know, the benefits, but I just think we're not selling it either. You know, if people would elect to buy a property that provided that flexibility, and also, like you say, other aspects like, I don't like it, you know, there's just there's so much, I think, but we just don't market it well either.
And I think for the urgent need for more affordable housing, we're looking at people who are characterized by being older, people with disabilities, people who are very low income, in many cases, people who are unhoused or homeless, depending on where you are in the world, where issues of functional ability are pretty much guaranteed to be a factor. All three of those populations. That is just normal. That isn't special. It's not, you know, for this group or that group. And I think to really think about how do we move towards an understanding and the practical guidance on adaptable homes that really anticipate how ordinary these needs are, that it's not them over there, but it's really about us. And I think that's a
essence, isn't it, of this inclusive, is that it just makes it easier for everyone, and that's good design, is inclusive design.
Yes, I mean, all you have to, you only need to know, you know, one or two occasions over life where somebody calls you and said, my father has just had a stroke, what are we supposed to do? And they're absolutely alarmed and know that they have nothing prepared. I'm going to ask, we've got an interesting comment. We've got people who are helping people buy the book. Beware though, do not go. Yeah, I would recommend CAE or RIBA. Both are sources that are reliable for the actual real quality book, and do make sure to look there. I do have an interesting comment, and this is from Orla McCann. You may know her from Northern Ireland. We have a design communication toolkit. She said it might have been renamed by now, but a lot of effort went into co-design and overcoming some of the barriers that the language used by health professionals and design/housing people, they use language that ordinary folks who are going to live in these units don't necessarily understand. So it's partly a plain language conversation about housing design. Suggestions from our experts. So I think we will look up the communications, and Orla, if you have a link to that, by all means share it with everyone.
Yeah, actually, I think I remember seeing that a long time ago. I'd sort of forgotten about it, but absolutely, I suppose that's the whole thing about communicating, isn't it? And I mean, we always laugh because, well, not laugh, but in the regen team, they always talk about addresses, and I talk about people's names, and it's like it is, it's that it is. I suppose we need to learn to speak each other's language and not being too technical, and that it sort of goes to my point about some of the systems now that we're putting in properties are just so complicated and technical. But, I'm lucky because I can do that hand holding, but the number of people that don't have that or don't understand, like developers will just give them the instructions. I mean, how many of us can read like it's pages and pages, like, but if you can't go on YouTube or other websites are available, whatever. But I think that's a really good point, and that's why I always, when I speak to developers, I think it is about speaking their language. And when I say sort of marketability, I think it like and that goes back to the whole thing about saying accessible, adaptable. I mean, I think it does conjure up images of those public toilets or whatever. As soon as you say accessible, they're like, ooh. But then as soon as I work with people and they see, like, people get really sort of proud of what they're doing. Or it was in COVID, and one person came and sort of said, oh, my wife, she became ill, and then she's spending more time, and it just made me really think. I think I don't know, like, do they think it's not real people that live there in the end? It is all of us. So there is that barrier, but I definitely agree. I think language, and that's where, even going back to what Marnie said about M42 being called accessible and adaptable. Well, accessible for who? And that's why I just love it if we could just call it sort of, I don't know, good housing or general housing. But I think, yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And also, sorry, just to say, although it says wheelchair housing, I'm acutely aware we also intended it for people, maybe just people who need a bit more space. But obviously, yeah, it always gets labelled as wheelchair housing. Sorry, Marnie.
No, yeah, I just think, and that's what we've learned throughout this process is, what we're trying to do is get the message across, and it's a real opportunity to improve visual communication. I think especially, as I said earlier, the audience that we're kind of aiming for in the people who are delivering the housing are the architects and designers and contractors, and that's why we started with the technical drawings. But it feels like there's another step to go where
Yeah,
another
definitely.
thing that's happened that and like we said, finding good examples that you can just say, look, you can do it. I used to have a thing I used to have collect pictures and have a little file in my bag that I would get out and say, look, you can do it. Here's an example. This is how you do it. So, because it's that when you're all standing about trying to visualize it in your head or trying to use the different technical, I think there's a real need for more good examples of demonstrating what can be done. So yeah, that's
and I think
sorry.
I think what you've done is build a bridge to reality from the standards. To basically say, this is, you've filled in all the pieces that aren't there. But for a real world scenario, one of the things that we'll have to think about and ask you about for your next big publication is thinking about family housing.
Yeah.
And just recognizing that there's some very specific things. And I think as we look at the profile of reasons for disability among children and youth, we're really looking at that spectrum of brain-based reasons for disability. And I think families are so eager for help in what can design do. So I think you've probably got a long list of things that you're going to do next, but some sort of supplement on family housing would be filling a necessary gap.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
it would be really interesting to explore that with with that sort of. One of the interesting things we learned from Carly when we got her involved, who is working for more mainstream, well, high-end mainstream architects, is that they're not encouraged either. They're either not encouraged to put people in drawings, or they put them in smaller than, so it's because they don't want to show how small the space is, you know. So it's kind of, she was really keen to do it because it's the reality, isn't it? And it's really interesting point you're making about how those drawings could be populated with the whole family. It'd be a really interesting exercise to do, wouldn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I suppose we were slightly limited, but I have to say that's why I always kept trying to bring in different examples, because definitely a lot of the work I do is with families and with people a completely broad range of disability, you know,
Yeah.
behaviors of concern. It's a massive issue, and yeah, I totally
when
hear
I
you.
worked on the guidance for neurodivergent residents and people with learning disability, a particular
Actually,
issue was that the wheelchair standard flats would have been a better size for families who need to accommodate all those sorts of different spaces. Yeah.
please make a pitch for BSI designed for the mind, because it is the only place in the world that this has actually been addressed in such a serious and comprehensive way. So let's make it's available online for nothing. Please make
And
yourselves familiar with it.
And Jean was one of our peer reviewers as well. So she's a good friend and colleague.
That very important. Jean Hewitt is the primary author of that publication, but we use it every day. There is, you know, just every reason that you should have this on your shelf. You should have it in your computer.
One thing I will say is, because I sit on the British Standards Institute group that Jean does as well, there's something called BS 9266, which is British Standards for General Housing. So that has come up for review a long time ago, and it is something we're going to be looking at in terms of revising it. And I think very much Jean will be advising around, but it's all that sort of thing. We're trying to pull everything together, so we're sort of at the really early stages, but I'm glad you said that, because that's about the family housing as well. That's definitely something for us to think about going forward. Yeah, I mean, there are masses of gaps, really.
But you've made such an impression in filling those gaps.
Thank you.
We are very much in your debt. People keep having trouble. They are simultaneously listening to you and ordering the guide. And the CAE site apparently says it doesn't ship outside of Britain. So
no,
the
RIBA
site
doesn't.
definitely does. So please, and it's on sale on the RIBA site. And I only waited a few days for my copies. So I think that is doable.
The only thing to say is, sorry, it's very difficult to find. I don't want to sound negative, but it's very difficult to find on the RIBA webpage. But I mean, I'm happy to find it.
You can send the link to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, send the exact link to it. It doesn't, for some reason, it doesn't pop up.
I think there was a few issues with RIBA not shipping outside of the UK, wasn't there, Jax, a while back?
I've ordered multiple copies and it came.
Good. Oh, good, brilliant, good. Yeah. And thank you, everybody.
We are in your debt. It's marvelous, and you're also a lovely example of collegiality. That these projects are never solo, that it takes an enormous number of people involved, and you've done a nice job of crediting all those people with all that extraordinary expertise. And I think people are going to get going back to those slides that list all the publications, because I think many people are not aware of them. And it's just to understand the evolution and the various detailed guidance.
Just to quickly add to that, one thing that I was really keen to put as an appendix, which I think they were a bit unsure about first, is I was really keen that one of the appendix just lists way more than all that. So it's got loads of really good resources, websites, information, guidance, lots more than what was on that slide. So yeah, so there's a lot of information, and just because things change all the time as well, like we're always learning, aren't we?
Absolutely. But in our bias is that we learn from each other, that we share really wonderful work like this with the world. So we are in your debt.
Thank
We
you.
so enjoyed this. 2 hours disappeared very, very quickly. And I think book sales will pop up this week. There'll
be a spike.
We'll put
Thank
the
you.
actual link to the RIBA site, but had no trouble getting it outside of England. So, enjoy
much.
the rest of your evening, but our warmest regards and gratitude.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Bye, folks. Bye.
Bye.